Good morning. The 36th District Court in the state of Michigan is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marlena Taylor is now presiding. At this time, there will be no talking, no smoking, no chewing gum, no eating or drinking, no sleeping or laying down, and no driving or riding in a moving vehicle. Please keep your device on mute until addressed by staff. Also, keep your device on a leveled surface so that your face may be seen. Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning. Now calling the matter of the people versus Andre Williams Jr. This is ticket number SP 1295368. This is one count failed to secure load. May I have your name for the record, Mr. Williams, please?
Andre Williams.
Today is the date and time set for a review. Mr. Williams was ordered to pay $200. Upon his payment, we will dismiss that charge. He has paid that $200 today. Thank you, Mr. Williams. So I'm going to dismiss the failed to secure load, okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, if there's nothing further, sir, you're all set. You got your license back and everything?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right, you're all set, Mr. Williams. Thank you for your patience. Get back to work, okay?
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right.
You want me to end?
All right, you may be seated. Now calling the matter of the people versus the separate council. Now calling the matter of the people versus Nakia Wallace. This is case number Z808261. Count one is interfering with government employee performing their duty. Count two is loitering, impeding pedestrian or vehicle traffic. Appearances for the record, starting with the city of Detroit, please.
Good morning, Your Honor. Alexis Schrader for the people, P80322.
Thank you, and counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nancy A. Parker for defendant Nakia Wallace, P number P84325.
All right, Ms. Wallace, please state your name for the record.
Nakia Wallace.
Make sure you keep your voices up as my court reporter needs to be able to hear. Counsels, remember that. Are you ready to proceed with your first witness?
We are, Your Honor. We have two very brief preliminary matters.
Okay, go ahead.
The first matter is Ms. Wallace's count to the Z8082612. It's reflected in the My Court ROA system as a civil infraction or a parking matter, when it should be a misdemeanor. I spoke to Attorney Parker about it this morning. We've both always been under the understanding that it was a misdemeanor. We think it's just an issue with the record. We want to make sure the court is aware of. And then there has been a plea offer tendered. That plea offer will close this morning if they don't want to take it. Just for the record, the offer is for Ms. Wallace to plead guilty to her misdemeanor count two, that's loitering. That would be under a 12-month delayed sentence with community service to be argued by both parties. The interfering with government employee would be dismissed.
Delayed sentence.
Yes, Your Honor. 12 months.
Community service for the loitering. So I do have for the record, it is a civil infraction on this ticket. It says ordinance number 3157, 31-5-7 on my ticket.
Your Honor, can you do that again, please?
It says ordinance 31-5-7.
I believe they were reissued. I complained before it, Your Honor.
Yeah, is this not the latest copy then?
I don't believe that is.
Yep.
I can give you an update.
We did get a call this morning about that. Counsel, did you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor. So I was trying to find the ticket. Yes, Your Honor, we did receive that offer, I believe a few days ago, and we do reject it. I requested if there was possibly a plea offer that could be made that did not include a guilty plea, considering the fact that we strongly believe that my client did not do any wrongdoing. That was rejected, that any offer has to include a guilty plea, and therefore we rejected and we're going to move forward.
Just my understanding is not.
All right, we close today at the beginning of this hearing or closes at the end of the hearing?
The beginning, right now.
Okay, right now, okay, I just want to get some clarification. All right, so, as far as this ticket goes, you know, court has nothing to do with how it's put into the system. I know it was brought to our attention that this was indeed, what we have is as an ordinance violation, so, okay, at least come to some conclusion about what we're supposed to do with that particular ticket. I know it is being discussed right now, and the clerk's office has been made aware, and they are looking into it per my clerk's information that she just received moments ago. So that's all that I have at this point in time. I think we can proceed. Are y'all okay both with proceeding counsel for the city?
Yes, Your Honor. I think it would be important if we were going to take the plea today, but if not, it's something we can move forward.
And counsel?
I agree. I'll try to see if we can find any resolution maybe on a recess break or something, but, yeah, we're definitely prepared to just move forward.
That's all I want to know. I didn't want it to have to stop anything, so.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome. All right, are there any more preliminary matters for the city? Any more preliminary matters for you, Madam Defendant?
No, Your Honor.
All right, then we can start and proceed with the next witness.
At this time, Your Honor, we call our first witness for today, Shannon Walker.
Ms. Walker, if you can take the stand for me, please. Can you please tell Madam for recording your name?
Shannon Walker, SHANNON,
Thank you. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, you may have a seat. Ms. Walker, before you begin, for the record, can you state your name once more?
Shannon Walker.
Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Walker, can you please describe what your position with the city of Detroit is?
I'm an attorney with the City of Detroit Law Department. I've been employed there for 26 years. I'm currently assigned to the Criminal Enforcement Unit, and I've been the supervisor in that unit since 2014.
What are your duties as a supervisor?
I manage, depending on staffing, between 6 and 8 attorneys that cover the 12 traffic ordinance and misdemeanor courtrooms at 36th District Court.
And we've heard some descriptions from prior witness Lawrence Garcia about the civil attorneys in the department over at the city county building, also referred to as KMAC. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
How much interaction do you have with the civil side of the law department over at KMAC?
Very little.
Do you work out of the same building?
I do not.
Okay, where do you work?
I work here at 36th District Court. We have an office on the 4th floor.
And with your duties as supervisor, do you ever handle any civil matters?
No.
Okay, what are your duties exactly?
We do just the traffic, misdemeanor, and ordinance, criminal or civil infraction violations here at 36th District Court.
Were you also performing those duties back in the summer of 2020?
I was.
Are you familiar with the protest that happened in the summer of 2020, led by, in some cases, the Detroit Low Grade movement?
Yes.
Okay, what was your interaction with those protests when they began?
Due to COVID being at one of its highest levels, I was the only person actually working in the office here at 36th District Court processing whatever warrants came in. The only interaction that I had was when I, at some point in the summer of 2020, received approximately 250 discovery requests from attorneys representing people that were ticketed during that protest.
What did you do with those discoveries?
I did my best. As I was the only person working, DPD had their highest COVID levels ever. I was unable to get discovery in most cases.
And because of that, were some cases dismissed as a matter of discovery motions?
All cases were dismissed with the exception of one.
To your knowledge, was one of the cases that was dismissed Ms. Nikita Wallace?
Yes, it was.
And to your knowledge, was that due to issues with discovery?
Yes, absolutely.
When did you first become aware of these issues with discovery?
When I tried to get discovery from DPD, I found it very difficult to be able to relate back from the ticketing officer to the arresting officer. So it was during, I don't remember if it was summer of 2020 or fall of 2020. It was somewhere in there.
And you described there being issues relating arresting officer back to the ticket, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you describe that to us in more detail?
So to my understanding, what DPD did when they arrested people, they were taken to a particular area. In that area, and another officer would pick them up and take them and transport them to a different area where people were ticketed. The problem was there was no, and then, I'm sorry, and then at the ticketing area, that person wrote the ticket. So the person that wrote the ticket was not the person that was on the scene, actually observed behavior into the arrest. Therefore, the person that ticketed couldn't testify to any actions taken by that person.
How did that make the discovery process difficult?
Because I couldn't identify what each person did. And because I couldn't identify what each person did, I couldn't move forward with any of their cases with the exception of one.
After the majority of the cases were dismissed for discovery issues, was there a task force created?
There was.
And what is your familiarity with that task force?
So when there were over 200, 250, I don't remember the exact number of cases dismissed, obviously it became an issue for DPD that we, incurred all this police time and, what can we do to not let this happen going forward? So we put a task force together to see what the problems were, what could be fixed moving forward, and what, if any, evidence was there regarding any of the cases from 2020.
Was any evidence found regarding any cases from 2020?
So as a result of this meeting that myself, Doug Baker, North Garcia had with members of DPD, there was, I don't remember how many people, 10 to 12 officers from DPD assigned to look into all the evidence. After they finished looking at all the evidence, they decided that there was, I don't remember if it was 7 or 8 warrants that they could present that had evidence to move forward with.
Was Ms. Wallace one of those warrants to your knowledge?
Yes.
Okay, and why was it decided that Ms. Wallace was the case that could be reissued?
I received a packet of reports where they identified officers that actually observed Ms. Wallace in the middle of the street, not leaving after the police asked her to leave. And Lieutenant Demps actually observing behavior that he believed interfered with duties.
When the original tickets were issued back in the summer of 2020, to your knowledge, were they interfering with government employee tickets or disorderly conduct?
I don't recall.
If the tickets had been changed from the original one issued by the officer to what was issued by warrant and complaint, would you have an explanation as to why?
I couldn't explain why the original tickets were written because I wasn't there. The reason for the reissue and the change of charge would be to comply with the evidence that could be presented and proven based on observations of people at the scene.
Were these charging decisions made in concert with the attorneys in DPD?
The attorneys at DPD?
The attorneys and DPD.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
And did you instruct anyone at DPD or any of your supervising attorneys to specifically target anyone?
no,
Were you aware that Ms. Wallace had filed a civil lawsuit against the city?
I was aware that a civil lawsuit was filed. I believe I was aware that Ms. Wallace was in it. I'm not sure. There was, like, I want to say 10 to 13 people that were in that lawsuit. I believe I recall hearing Ms. Wallace name as part of it.
Were you aware that the city filed a counter complaint sometime after the civil complaint was filed?
I heard about it through the media.
Were you aware that the counter complaint was eventually dismissed?
Heard about that through the media as well, yes.
Did you instruct any officers or any of your supervising attorneys to target anyone as the subject of that dismissal of the counter complaint?
Absolutely not.
Did you personally review any video for the purpose of looking for charges to issue against Ms. Wallace or anyone else?
I didn't get the video until I received the warrant package. And that's when I was able to look at some video. I don't recall what officers it was. And I don't recall specifically for which person it was because they gave me a video that just showed multiple people.
To your knowledge, were there any to your knowledge, were any tickets not able to be reissued because of a lack of evidence, a lack of connection to an arresting officer?
Oh yeah, over 200 tickets were not reissued by complaint warrant that were initially dismissed for notice number.
And was that inability to reissue due to the instruction of you and other attorneys?
No,
Did you strike that? Did you eventually instruct Ms. Wallace's ticket, among others, to be reissued the criminal ticket?
I didn't instruct any tickets to be reissued. I only asked that they compile the evidence and present me with warrants with whatever they believed contained enough evidence to move forward.
Nothing further.
Thank you so much. Now. One more.
Good morning, sir.
So you stated that you were the supervising attorney, is that the correct title?
The long title is Supervising Assistant Corporation Counsel, but I was assigned to Criminal Enforcement 36 District Court.
And in that capacity, were you present in almost all of the courtrooms where these protester cases were docketed?
As I couldn't be in all of them at the same time, but many of them, I was in many of them, yes.
And can you tell me, when was the first time you learned of my client?
I honestly don't recall exactly when I first learned of these laws.
So you stated that you were aware about the protest and that partly organized by Detroit Wood Reed. Were you?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to hear you, and that's why I'm tilting.
Okay, no problem. I'll try to speak up. I'm trying to be holistic here. You stated that you agreed that you knew that Detroit Wood Reed was one of the leaders of the protest, right?
I understood they were part of it, yes.
Okay. Were you aware that Nikhil Wallace was the leader in Detroit Wood Reed?
At some point I learned that, but I don't recall exactly when.
Okay. You also stated that you followed the local news. Do you recall seeing any press coverage or any coverage about the press conference that was held by the leaders of Detroit Wood Reed during the summer?
I think there was a few press conferences. I don't know that I saw all of them, but I did see a couple. Yeah.
Okay. And one specifically was about the federal civil litigation that was filed. You stated that your criminal division is separate from the civil division, is it correct?
Correct.
But were you aware that the legal claims in that civil litigation were for unconstitutional violation by DPD in terms of rubber bullets, spraying people with mace, brutality? Were you aware of the contents of what that case was about?
Not specific content, but I knew it was like a police misconduct kind of thing.
Okay. And I understand that you're in two separate buildings, but is it your testimony that you didn't have any conversations with Lawrence Garcia in regards to the issues in that civil litigation?
We met about reissuing. I don't remember if we talked at all about civil litigation during those, but because my focus wasn't that. I had nothing to do with that. My focus was what we were reissuing, and we may have discussed it. I don't remember specifically.
Okay, I want to back up a little bit. Prior to the reissuance, during the time where the civil litigation was going on, that would have been in August of 2020. During that time, so not the reissuance period, but the previous in the beginning, did you have any conversations with either Lawrence Garcia or anyone in the civil team in regards to the evidence that they were looking at?
August of 2020.
Either August or September timeframes.
I don't remember. I honestly don't remember that part of that.
Okay, no problem. Lawrence Garcia testified that there were what he called collaborative meetings as the civil team was reviewing evidence of all the named individual plaintiffs. Do you recall whether you attended or were briefed on any of those civil litigation collaborative teams?
I did not attend those. Was I briefed? I don't think so, but I'm not 100%.
Are you aware, based on Lawrence Garcia's testimony, he stated that they looked at DPD video of every named plaintiff that they could find to try to see if they could successfully defend the civil litigation. Were you aware that Lawrence Garcia and those folks were reviewing DPD video of those plaintiffs who were also defendants?
I was aware of that.
You were aware, okay. And so with that knowledge, did you ever inquire or seek any of that evidence, knowing that the civil team had it?
Not from the civil team. Clark Hill was initially part of it. So I did try to communicate with Clark Hill, but not the city civil team. My understanding is Clark Hill was the.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walker. You're right, that it was at that time in the beginning, Clark Hill. So what was the response from Clark Hill when you reached out to them?
When I asked for specific videos as to the people that we were trying to reissue for, they gave me whatever they could find. And in most cases, it just wasn't enough. So that's why we had to go to the task force for reissue.
All right, and just to back you up just a little bit more, so prior to the reissuance period, because that would have been in 2021, was there any point in time in 2020 when you reached out to Clark Hill and requested any information?
I don't remember if it was the beginning, end of 2020 or beginning of 2021, honestly, I don't recall.
Understood, no problem. So going specifically to the day in question, this is July 10th of 2020. Were you aware that on that day when my client was arrested, that that was the day that she was put in a chokehold and taken to the ground?
Are you asking, I guess I need to understand, when are you asking, did I ever become aware those were the allegations, or did I know that day?
Did you know either soon thereafter, July 10th, and currently now, that on July 10th, the date of this arrest, that DPD put my client, Ms. Nikia Wallace, in a chokehold and took her to the ground?
I understand those were the allegations.
Okay. And were you aware that that image of the DPD officer choking my client went viral?
I saw it on the front page of, I don't remember the actual newspaper or online, but I did see an image on a paper, yes.
Thank you. And you stated that, to your recollection, about over 250 folks were arrested. Is that correct?
I don't know about arrested, but I saw that many tickets.
Okay, so we're at least over 250 people were issued citations and tickets for protesting.
Correct.
And as supervising attorney, were you the last buck in terms of what happened to all those citations that were issued?
No.
So who would have been the person that had the authority as to what to do with this?
My supervisor is Doug Baker.
So my client was initially charged with disorderly conduct. Is that correct? To your knowledge?
Probably. If you're saying that's what the ticket showed, I have no reason.
Understood. And on that original ticket, you stated that we, as part of the defense coalition, we issued or we submitted a bunch of discovery requests, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at the time that we filed those requests, 2020, late 2020, argued some in the beginning of 2021, do you recall that did you defend those motions?
Some of them.
Okay. And in your defense of those motions, is it accurate that your position, the city's position, was that A, all evidence was either turned over or destroyed, and that there was no way of identifying who the officers were?
Did you ask me that in two different?
Absolutely,
questions?
absolutely. So you argued the motion in some of the courts for the defense motion to dismiss based on lack of discovery, correct?
Most of them, yes.
And was part of your argument, did you argue that you had turned over to defense counsel all of the evidence that you had in your possession, and that if you didn't turn it over, the reason you didn't turn it over was because it's destroyed?
I don't recall saying that it must have been destroyed, no. I do recall saying that I had it in my possession, but again, I obviously didn't have everything.
And as a city attorney and supervisor, it is part of your legal requirement to seek out evidence and documentation from DPD, correct?
Correct.
All right, and so prior to the reissuance, so when the original charge is still pending, did you seek the discovery that defense was requesting in my client's case?
Yes.
And what was the response you received from DPD when you did so?
At first, it was they didn't have the resources to try to look for it. And then it was, like I said, I previously testified, because they couldn't relate back for most people from the ticketing officer to the arresting officer. They told me they just didn't have it. And that's why we compiled a task force to be able to look at specific video and try to relate back based on who they know and who they could identify.
When did you compile this task force?
I believe it was the beginning of 2021, January, February, I don't remember exactly, but beginning of 2021.
So it would not have been compiled post dismissal, which would have been in February, late February of 2020.
All the cases were dismissed at different times because they were assigned to different judges. So based on scheduling, so I can't say a yes or no to that. It would depend on which judge it was in.
Okay, so specifically as it relates to my client, your testimony today, I just want to be accurate, is that the task force was created prior to the end of February 2021?
That's my recollection, yes.
Was the task force working, looking through evidence while the discovery motions were pending?
That's hard to answer because they were in different courtrooms, but I believe so. Because it took the task force 2 or 3 months before they got everything back to me.
And let me try to rephrase that. I'm trying to ask, was the task force compiled so that you guys could comply and produce for the pending discovery motions?
For the ones that were still pending, yes, and for the ones that had already been dismissed to see if there was any evidence that could allow probation.
All right, so with my client, Ms. Nakia, her case was still pending. We didn't have a hearing before Judge Martin's Clark until late February. Did you instruct that task force to get you document, evidence, video that you could submit before the court, before Martin's Clark court, while that was still pending?
Don't remember asking them specifically for Ms. Wallace. I don't remember. I may have, 3 years ago.
And is it common routine for the city of Detroit to allow discovery motions to lapse?
Your Honor, I have to object to relevance. I know it's a factor, but this is a motion for retaliatory prosecution. The discovery motions are over and done. You don't need to rewrite the law. They were dismissed because of the pending discovery issues, and they were reissued. We agree on that.
Your Honor, I'm trying to understand and lay the fact about timing here, and the fact that they were pending discovery motions is very important to our case in terms of proving the retaliatory prosecution, because we believe the city's actions make no sense when you look at the time frame. So I'm trying to get to whether the task force was trying to act pursuant to a pending motion. And if that was the case, it would only make sense that the evidence that they had,
A pending 6 criminal motion?
the discovery motion,
Oh, okay.
the discovery request motion.
I'll give you a little leeway, but I want you to be very mindful of the time that we have in this hearing
Yes, Your Honor.
today.
Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely.
I just be very mindful, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Absolutely. And Ms. Walker, can you tell us who was part of this task force? We just keep saying task force.
I can remember the officer names. It was led by Sergeant Timothy Vernon.
I'm sorry, I can.
Timothy Vernon, Sergeant Timothy Vernon was my main contact. His supervisor was Commander Niran Salaji. And then I remember there was an officer named Horn Buckle or Horn Shuffle, something like that. It was Horn something. And then there was 4 or 5 other officers as well, but I don't recall their names.
Were you the only city attorney present? Or let me rephrase. So the task force was solely DPD?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me move you along to the second collaborative body that Lawrence Garcia spoke of in terms of the reissuance of tickets. We were told that a committee or a team or a body were put together. Can you tell us who was on that team?
That was the task force.
Okay, so who would have met in terms of attorneys and deciding people to reissue?
The only one big meeting we had was all DPD. The only attorneys there were Lawrence Garcia, Doug Baker, and myself. The rest was DPD. Like I said, it was Sergeant Vernon, Commander Salaji, I remember Lieutenant Cole, Lieutenant Dempsey, Captain Warboys, and then there was a couple other officers that I don't.
So there was only one meeting that you guys had to determine whether to reissue tickets?
One meeting to have them gather evidence. Once they gathered the evidence, Sergeant Vernon brought it to me in, what we call, like felony packet format, where, it's like, the DPD investigators reports and everything else is compiled. And then I reviewed it and decided if evidence should move forward. And then I sent everything over to Doug Baker and got his confirmation.
Understood. All right. So Ms. Walker, then, what was it that you viewed, or what was the catalyst that made you present to Doug Baker the reissuance of tickets against my client?
The documents that I got that indicated which officers were involved, the actual observations of each officer and what they could testify to. Based on the information provided in written format, I decided that contained enough to move forward.
Thank you. Ms. Walker, I would like to take you back to a pretrial hearing for Ms. Walker that occurred on January 28th.
So you Ms. Wallace?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, my client, Ms. Wallace. Deep apologies. It was before, again, Judge Martins Clark on January 28th, 2021. I was there representing my client and you were there representing the city. Do you recall that hearing or that time frame?
I kind of, it's been, a couple of years, I kind of remember it.
No problem. Stay with me here. I just have a question that may jog your recollection. Upon checking into the court that day, we were discussing possibility of dismissing these cases. As you stated, the city had dismissed a bunch, and through our motions, a bunch of cases had already been dismissed, correct?
I remember having a conversation with you about that, yeah.
Yep, all right. Do you recall that on that day, prior to going on the record, do you recall having a conversation with the court clerk in which you said that you were definitely not going to agree to dismiss Ms. Wallace's case?
No, not at all. I didn't have any evidence at that time. I couldn't move forward.
Exactly. So knowing that you did have evidence, you don't recall stating, even in the absence of evidence, you stated when it was originally the disorderly conduct case, you stated that we're definitely not going to agree to dismiss Ms. Wallace's case.
Actually, Your Honor, asked the answer. She said she didn't say that.
I think she said she didn't remember. I was trying to get a definitive answer. Or she said she didn't recall.
I don't recall, but I wouldn't have said that.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, and so we talked about the fact that over 250 were dismissed. You did your task force, and then did you say 10 cases were reissued?
7 or 8.
7 or 8. Okay, thank you. In the reissuance and the focus of the task force, did you give the task force any direction? Meaning, did you say specifically look for evidence against my client?
No.
So are you aware that the other, and you said 7 or 8, the count that we have is about 4 reissuance. Are you aware, or would you be surprised to learn that the 4 that were reissued were all either plaintiffs in the civil litigation or leaders of the DWP case?
All I know is leaders of the DWP, Mr. Christensen and Ms. Wallace. I don't know anybody else would be a leader, but I know there was more than 4 that were reissued.
Did you authorize the reissuance of charges against Dr. Brian Silverstein?
Yes.
Are you aware that Dr. Brian Silverstein is a prominent leader in DWB?
Objection is to relevance, Your Honor.
I agree.
Fair, I'll move on, Your Honor. Move on, Your Honor. Did you order the reissuance of Lloyd Simpson?
Yes.
And I just want to circle back to the federal litigation. Again, you were not part of that team. However, were you notified once the judge had dismissed the city's counterclaim with prejudice?
I learned about it. I don't remember how I.
Did that have any bearing on the reissuance of tickets against my client?
No.
Is there a reason why you reissued different charges against my client?
Yes, so the evidence showed.
And so then, is it your testimony that the original charge was inappropriate?
I can't speak. I wasn't present. All I can say is I couldn't find the witnesses to testify to it.
Do you know whether DPD struck that? Who made the final call to reissue the tickets? I know you said that you presented it to Doug Baker. Was it you, Doug Baker, or Lawrence Garcia, just for clarification?
I sent them to Doug. He gave me the approval. I spoke to Mr. Garcia or not, but my approval came from Mr.
So, Ms. Walker, you stated that there was only one main meeting for that collaborative process. Lawrence Garcia previously testified that he recalled there being about 3 to 6 meetings scheduled, and that Nancy Goldbach, I believe, would have been part of those meetings. Does that sound familiar to you?
I've never been in a meeting. She was at, she's an assistant and they have set up meetings, but I've never been in a meeting and she was also.
So if she scheduled the meetings, does 3 to 6 sound like a number, or no?
Not that I attended.
So I'm almost done, Ms. Walker. I just want a little bit more clarification in terms of what the task force was directed to do to get the reissuance of these tickets. Again, I'm trying to understand how we go from over 250 people to really just a handful without any, there was no directive points in times or protests that the task force was looking at?
They were looking at the July 10th incident. We were given the directive to, and I don't remember where it came from in the meeting, it was decided, I don't remember who decided it, to just go with the July 10th date. They were told to look at all body cam videos, scout car videos, social media postings, written reports, anything that they could find. And then try to identify officers, try to meet with those officers and see what their recollection was and who they could identify as to what happened on that day.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Walker. That's illuminating. That makes more sense now. So who, you said you don't recall who made that decision to only look at July 10th?
It was in that big meeting. I remember it was bounced around different ideas and they decided to just start with that date. We had talked about possibly meeting later for later other incidents that had happened. But those other meetings never, well, I can say I was never present at any other meetings after that.
Okay, Ms. Walker, in that big meeting, please, can you list all the people who were present in that big meeting?
Yes, that was Lawrence Garcia, Doug Baker, and myself from the law department. Can't recall all police, but I can remember quite a few. That was Andrew Salaji, Captain Warboys, Lieutenant Dennis, I don't remember his first name, Lieutenant Brandon Cole, Sergeant Timothy Vernon, Sergeant Tim Barr. And then there was 3 or 4 other officers that I just don't know their names.
Thank you, that's sufficient. In that meeting, was there any justification given as to why July 10th was the pertinent date?
Because that was the first date of the incident, so that the original thing that happened in May and June, we were told from, my understanding was the mayor's office that he was not going to move forward with the majority of those cases. He didn't want to spend more police time on them. And that was the first one that we were looking at.
And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, we were going to, the plan was, once those were done, we were going to look at other dates in the summer, but again, I was never present in the other meetings.
So following that, Ms. Walker, were you given any explanation as to why there was no more further discussion of other dates to look at?
I was not. All I know was that the police were losing people. They had so many people out for COVID. Every time it was, I asked a question, they'd say, okay, we're gonna get to it. And it just never meeting scheduled, at least that I attended.
Do you know, to your knowledge, was the task force like disbanded or canceled?
The majority of them were part of, under Commander Salaji, and I know he retired. So I don't know if they disbanded them or they reassigned. I don't know what happened. I do know the commander retired, and then I didn't hear anything else.
Okay, thank you. From the city, after that big meeting, were you the sole attorney that met with the officers and got their information, looked through their documents? Was that solely your responsibility?
Myself and Mr. Baker, but it was mostly.
Ms. Walker, I'm just solely asking your opinion, because you stated that you don't know why, or I strike that. You stated that they said, look at July 10th because that was a big day or big issue or something of that nature. Would it be fair to say that the fact that my client was put on a chokehold on that day played a factor?
Not my
Objection, Your Honor, she's already stated she doesn't know why.
Your Honor, I'm asking for her opinion if she believes that that was part
Your
of it.
opinion is not necessary in these type of hearings. We're going on what the issues are for this particular case, so objection sustained. You're welcome.
Ms. Walker, can you speak to what you mean when they said that that was the date of a big incident?
There was a lot of arrests made that day. There was injuries to officers that day. That was my understanding.
Okay. Ms. Walker, I know we've been talking about the protest writ large and, over 250 people, but on July 10th specifically, do you recall how many people were arrested on July 10th?
I don't. Like I said, I got all those discovery requests at one time, and I don't recall how many handouts to which day.
If I told you that there were only 10 arrests on that day, does that sound familiar?
I really can't. I don't know for sure.
If I could just have one moment, Your Honor.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I can drink water.
You may. I'm supposed to say, do we have some? We're gonna keep that up there.
Thank you.
Just hopefully one more question, Ms. Walker.
Okay.
Thank you. You just stated that officers were injured, is that correct?
That's my understanding.
To your knowledge, was anyone charged with assaulting an officer?
I don't know. That would have went to the Lane County prosecutor. I would have no knowledge of that.
But you're aware that my client, Nikia Wallace, was never charged with any assaulted offense, correct?
I don't believe she was, 'cause it would have caused jeopardy issues. It would have arisen out of the same offense, so I don't believe she was.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. That's all I have in the moment.
Any redirect?
Very good. Mr. Walker, you stated earlier there were issues at the July 10th protest, maybe some others, connecting arresting officers back to individual defendants, back to the allegations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did those issues eventually get fixed?
Yes.
How were they fixed?
So from my understanding, what DPD is now doing is they are either color coding zip ties or putting some kind of identifying marks on the zip ties that will let the officers down the line know who was the arresting officer, whether they keep a list of them, like I said, by color, by number, by letter, whatever their identifying mark is.
Do you remember when exactly in the summer that started?
I do not. I know it was a discussion that we had at our first task force meeting, but when they actually made it take effect, I don't know.
Last question, does the Corporation Council, formerly Lawrence Garcia, sorry, did Lawrence Garcia, in his capacity as Corporation Counsel, make a habit of consulting with you on civil matters?
Never,
Did he make it a habit of keeping you abreast of civil matters, of discovery issues over at the City County Building?
never, not at all.
Is your supervisor Doug Baker?
It is.
Did you get your marching orders from Doug Baker?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. I do have one question, and I'll allow both council to ask questions based off of mine. So the original issuing tickets that they had, those were submitted by police officers. You didn't review those?
Correct.
And then the package that was presented to you were the only ones that you reviewed to see whether or not they're going to be charged reissued.
Correct.
Any questions based off of my questions?
No, Your Honor.
All right, how about you, counsel? Give me a moment to think, you can. I ain't gonna rush you.
Thank
No problem.
No, Your Honor.
Sure. All right, then, we're all set. Thank you. Does anyone need a moment of break before we start the next one?
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, you can.
Okay, no, the next witness is coming down.
Okay, no problem. Get the water.
Oh, no. Go behind you. Oh, go behind you. Excuse me. You did a napkin, or I didn't realize these cups.
It's limited. Actually, very little professional.
Are you familiar with the protests that originated, are you familiar with the protests involving the Detroit Vote Breathe movement that occurred in the summer of 2020? And when did you become aware of those?
At the time, they
Were you involved with the original criminal cases?
were. Yes, I was.
At some time in that summer, did you become aware of numerous discovery motions pending against the protester tickets?
Yes.
And what was your involvement with those discovery motions?
Well, basically, I would be conferring with those with Shan, since she would be directly handling, directly attempting to respond. So it was kind of once removed in that regard for about problems.
Just to clarify, by Shannon, you mean Shannon Walker?
Yes.
Are you her direct supervisor?
Yes.
Who is your direct supervisor?
Probably Chuck Ramey and or Lawrence Garcia.
Would that be corporation counsel?
Yes.
Did you become aware of the criminal cases against the summer protesters being dismissed because of pending discovery motions?
Yes.
What was your involvement with those dismissals, if any?
Well, we talked about the problems in meeting the deadlines because there was such a voluminous amount of material to go through body cam, and that the way that was shaping up, we didn't have, as I understood it, very much choice in terms of taking that particular action.
Were you aware that prior to these discovery dismissals, that some of the protesters had filed a federal civil lawsuit against the city?
Yes.
What was your involvement in any of that federal lawsuit?
I really didn't have that.
Did anyone ask you any questions about it? Were you ever consulted to your knowledge?
Trying to remember if there was any conversations in passing. There was nothing. There was never any particular meetings or in-depth discussions that I had with anyone about the lawsuit. I knew it was going on, and the criminal matters were still active or potentially.
Would it be fair to say you were really focused on the criminal matters?
Oh, really?
Were you made aware at all that eventually the city filed a counter complaint against the federal plaintiffs?
Yeah, and I think it was sometime after that it was filed that I heard in passing that the counterclaim had been filed.
Were you aware that that counterclaim was eventually dismissed?
Yes.
Okay. Were you aware of that dismissal in real time, or did you find out later?
I don't think it's certainly not on the day of. I think it was somehow a conversation.
I'm going to back you up. As a result of the discovery dismissal, were you involved in the creation of a DPD task force?
Yes.
Can you describe that task force to us?
Yeah. What we did was problem in the cases was connecting arresting officers to particular defendants. The focus of the police at that time was crowd control, and they had their hands full doing that. And the procedure that they had developed was getting people away from the scene and then transporting them elsewhere, and another set of officers did tickets. So with the result that we didn't have the usual situation where the ticket issued by the officers also the arresting officer. So we had that problem. When you looked at the video, it was very difficult to make out facial features of people. If you look at all this video, it's very difficult to be able to say who was who. So what we did was we wanted to go through, and there was like a tremendous amount of video to go through that and make the cases that we could make based on video. So we didn't have time to do that. I certainly didn't do any of that. I looked at some of the video, but we had to have officers dedicated to doing it. And that task force was formed to go through that and determine what cases can be.
As a result of the creation of that task force, were some cases needed to be issued?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding of how many?
I did it one time. I mean, it was less than 10.
To your knowledge, was one of those cases that was reissued for Akil Wallace?
Yes.
Did you direct any member of EPD or any of your supervising attorneys to specifically target any person in their review of that footage?
No.
Did you direct anyone at EPD or your supervising attorneys to specifically target Mr. Akil Wallace?
No.
Did you specifically look through the video searching for Akil Wallace or any other members of Detroit Will Read?
No.
Why, in your understanding, were certain cases reissued and others not?
They were reissued because we were able to make a case, or a case was there in our evidence. So if the case was there, and we did what we're supposed to do as prosecutors.
Were any cases, to your knowledge, not reissued?
Yes.
Who made the final call on what cases to reissue?
Well, I think there was just a consensus. We looked at the cases and never got down to somebody directing anyone else to charge, but there would have been a consensus between myself, Jan, and Lawrence Garcia. So,
Are you aware that the original charges on scene on July 10th for Ms. Wallace and the charges that were reissued are different?
yeah, I think I did. And that may have occurred in that there may have been, they were all misdemeanors. They're all the same level of misdemeanor. But when we looked at it, we looked at them in terms of the attorneys that are going to bring the case in court. So we charged it according to what we thought facts and the laws.
For the second set of charges that were reissued, those were done in concert with the task force and with the attorneys, including yourself. Is that correct?
Yes.
With the tickets that were issued on scene, would those have been issued by an attorney or by a Detroit police officer?
Yes, by the police. And yeah, I've been doing this a long time, and there's often adjustments that have to be made between what police think may or may not be the charge and they submit, and what ultimately gets written in the charge. And that's kind of a normal recurring dynamic in the process.
I want to be very clear. Did you, as in your position as the chief of the criminal enforcement division, direct anyone to specifically target members of the Detroit Will Read movement?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Did you authorize or instruct anyone to reissue charges against Ms. Wallace as retaliation for the dismissal of the city's counter?
No.
Would you have ever done so?
No. As a matter of fact, the discussion in the settlement of that case, I was brought into that discussion by the attorneys in the office that were talking about the settlement that ultimately happened. And there was a proposal as part of the settlement that we dismiss these cases. And to me, I resisted them. I said, we can't do that because in a sense, that's like buying an outcome to the case because it's being woven into a part of the negotiations for settlement. And in prosecution, we've always kept the law. But what I thought of mainly was during my time with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office when I managed the drug, we always kept the wall between the forfeiture unit and the drug prosecutions because if you start blending them together, ultimately the dynamic becomes a price tag on the criminal case. So I said, no, we cannot do that. We've got cases and we're going. And that's how that went. It was settled without dismissing cases.
Just to be clear, in your position as chief of the criminal enforcement division, in your opinion, as an attorney, do you believe the charges that were issued against Ms. Wallace are in keeping with the standards of probable cause and are the appropriate charges?
Yeah.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
So I want to ask you about what has been termed maybe a collaborative meeting. We heard from previously testimony from Lawrence Garcia, as well as Shannon Walker, that there was a collaborative meeting with yourself and city officials to determine the reissuance of these tickets. Was July 10th the only date that was in discussion for reissuance of tickets?
No, I think it was, there was a number of dates that were that were in discussions. And I don't have them all in memory. They were during that summer. There was 7.
To your knowledge, do you know whether tickets that were reissued were for incidents on any other date outside of July 10th?
I think so.
Does your recollection change based on just immediate testimony you just heard from Ms. Walker, Shannon Walker, who stated that there was a meeting where someone said we were only looking at July 10th? Does that sound familiar to you?
You mean in terms of the task force and the reissue?
Yes, correct.
That could be. I know there was one date where the tickets, and I can't remember which date that was, weren't even sent over because there was a decision made, I think by police man who's on the scene. There was had some sort of accord reached with protesters, and whatever tickets were issued were not even sent over to the city. I know that was one day. I had some discussion on that. And whether ultimately we were talking about tickets on one date or not, I can't be sure. What I do know is what we talked about was what cases does our evidence support make? And that was all on one day.
So, Mr. Baker, were you looking, when you're looking at this copious amount of video that you said was a lot, were you looking for any particular defendant?
No.
You were just trying to make out faces?
What we looked at was when, and Shannon had more of a, I think, as I recall, more of a role in looking at the video. It was too overwhelming. There was no time for us to look through the video ourselves. So we needed somebody that was dedicated to do. That's all they did. And so the task force was formed. And we would rely on what they showed us, what they found in terms of supporting of the case. So we would, it would be looked at to that extent.
And can you tell us about how many meetings would you say that the task force had where you met with the task force to discuss?
Yeah, there were several, I don't remember. There weren't a lot of them, but there were,
Is it accurate to say about 5 to 6?
that could be. I'm not sure of that, but it's something.
And we just heard testimony that from Ms. Walker, she described July 10th as a big, a date of a big incident. Does that ring a bell in terms of conversations that you guys were having in this task force meeting about big incident dates?
No.
Okay. Do you recall, or do you know, excuse me, how many folks were arrested on July 10th?
No.
If I told you, there's been testimony that it struck that. If I told you about 10 folks were arrested on July 10th, does that sound right to you?
I don't know.
That's fair enough. Is it your knowledge today that about over 250 people were arrested? In general, not on July 10th?
Exactly. To take away your objection.
No, I'm asked and answered, doesn't know.
He said he doesn't know, counsel.
Oh, I was saying in general, not on July 10th. He didn't answer that question.
Okay, I asked that she restate the question.
We can restate the question.
Absolutely. Mr. Baker, do you recall about how many folks were arrested throughout the protest?
Yeah, and on all the days that we had protests. Yeah, I would, it was over 100, 200. Yeah, in that neighborhood.
Thank you. Mr. Baker, going back to your interactions with the civil team for the federal case against the city, you said that you were aware that certain defendants who were charged with city offenses were also plaintiffs, correct?
Yes, and some were not too.
Correct. And I understand you testified that you said something about a wall and there's two sides, the civil and the criminal. Is that right?
Well, I was saying that when I was brought into discussion, when they were talking settlement about dismissing our cases as part of the settlement, because the plaintiff side in the lawsuit was wanting that as part of the negotiation. And that's what I said I didn't want any part of it. We're not going to do that. We're going to proceed on this track, not going to blend a question of damages with dismissing cases.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
I
Baker.
said there's always a wall in prosecution between those sorts of things.
Thank you. I want to go back prior to, before we're talking about settlement or judgment. In terms of early on, the lawsuit was filed August 31st of 2020. You learned during that time period, or soon thereafter, August, September, you learned that some defendants are plaintiffs. Did it ever occur to you, or did you ever want to reach out to that team to look at their evidence?
To look at which team?
To reach out to the civil team to look at the evidence that they had to defend against the plaintiffs?
Well, I think we were all looking at the same stuff. I mean, we're looking at, so I don't remember doing anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. So a follow-up to that response, you're all looking at the same stuff. Are you aware that Lawrence Garcia testified that early on that he looked at videos of my client as in order to defend against the civil lawsuit?
I don't recall that. I mean, what videos, you mean police video?
Correct, body cam video.
I'm assuming it probably did. That sort of.
Okay, and Mr. Baker, you never reached over aisle or across the street, whatever you want to call it, to ask for, his interpretation of the video that he saw, or you never reached over to the civil team to discuss the videos and evidence that they were looking at, since it's the same?
No, I'm not gonna ask them about what criminal charges are faced. That's my job. That's what we do. I don't care, what conclusions they may or may not come to in terms of that. That's what we do.
And just for clarification, for the record, Mr. Baker, you discussed it as a settlement, but it was in fact a federal judgment entered against the city, correct?
Yeah, I guess, yes.
Thank you, just a point.
That's-
of clarification.
So,
And Mr. Baker, to your knowledge, did the task force continue to work to charge folks after the initial meeting that you guys decided that these charges were right for my client? Were there subsequent meetings?
no, I think it had sort of an end. I mean, this is what they came up with. This is what we looked at. As far as I remember, I think that was sort of it.
So, Mr. Baker, did anyone order like a cessation or a cancellation of the task force?
No, but I'm sure it would come together. I mean, the officers that were in there weren't like working on it necessarily all day, every day for a contiguous block of time. They would, from what I recall, they were putting in as much time as they could when they could. And then they would be devoting large blocks of time, but it would be over a period of time. And I think once they went through everything, my understanding, it was over.
And Mr. Baker, can you tell me, to your recollection, when that task force was formed?
No, I think I'm thinking it's summer.
I'm sorry, in the summer of 2020?
Yeah, I think so, somewhere around there. I'm just sort
Okay, no problem.
of.
All right. And Mr. Baker, is it your recollection that every meeting, strike that. Mr. Baker, every meeting, every task force meeting that you were present at, was Shannon Walker also present?
I don't remember that. I don't know.
And this should be one of my last questions here. Going back to what you describe as you weren't amenable to dismissing these cases in conjunction with the federal one. Does the city have any precedent for ever doing that before in terms of dismissing cases?
I would object as to relevance, Your Honor. I don't see where it has to do with retaliatory prosecution.
I think they have to give us some leeway on this one about asking the question. If you know the answer, come.
Your Honor, thank you.
Well, I don't know the answer to that, whether that's ever happened in the past. That's your question.
Correct.
Whether there's been both civil and criminal acts intertwined, and whether that's occurred, I don't know. And I'm not aware of any policy one way or another on that issue.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Baker. No further questions.
Any regret?
Very regret. Mr. Baker, in your position as chief of the criminal enforcement division, do you generally request video from the corporation counsel?
No.
Do you have to get your body camera videos from corporation counsel? If you have to get your marching orders on how to handle criminal cases from the corporation counsel?
No.
Did you seek your request of discovery from the Detroit Police Department?
Yes.
Nothing for here.
And I actually So, Attorney Baker, the authorization of those cases, did you actually do it or did Attorney Walker?
Probably, Walker.
Okay. But she's the person who's right under me.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Right.
All right, that's all. Any questions based on my question?
Your Honor, I did have one question based on, sister counsel.
I'll give you a little leeway, but just the one question.
Yeah, literally, that's the one question.
Okay.
You stated that you did present the discovery request to DPD. What was their response to you when you said, we need this discovery? What was DPD's
I
response?
think that's a misstatement of my question, Your Honor. It was, do you generally get your body camera footage from DPD? It's not if you requested in that instance. True.
Fair enough.
There's nothing further. Thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna just take a brief recess. Do you have your next person up? Okay.
Your Honor,
Yes.
this was also supposed to include 2 officers as well. It's Lieutenant Demps and Officer Eric Brown. It was based off of my colleague, John Royal's previous motion. We just had a couple questions for them in regards to why there was no activity log, and possibly a body camera from
It was supposed to be 2 officers. You don't have the
They
officers.
were present at the last 2 hearings, Your Honor. At our last hearing, Your Honor made a record of the purpose of this evidentiary hearing for the purpose of retaliatory prosecution. Those 2 officers don't have any prosecutorial discretion. If it's a discovery issue, that's a separate hearing.
Your Honor, it is not. When I joined this case, you stated on the record in an order. I literally have a copy of the order.
I stated on the order.
Yes, you
exactly
did.
who I wanted to have as part of this case today. So that kind of should have been addressed.
Your Honor, they've always been here. It's always
They
been.
have. So all of a sudden for them not to be present.
I can get them, Your
Can you
Honor.
find them? I was about to say, I was gonna take a break until 11:15 anyways. And then see if you can find them and let me know.
I would ask what the purpose of them presenting is. It's my evidentiary hearings. I need to know what to put them on to rebut.
Well, she can call them as her witnesses.
If this is for the retaliatory prosecution motion, it's my evidentiary hearing to rebut the presumption that Your Honor made at the beginning of this hearing.
Your Honor, this is a joint evidentiary hearing that was established that there was no need to bifurcate it, that we were gonna do the discovery issues that we had prior to me taking over. Mr. Royal submitted multiple motions, and this is part of this evidentiary. So I would like to call them in this evidentiary hearing if Mr. Counsel is taking a position that they are not.
Took liberty to decide what she wanted to do today. Give me a moment, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe, Your Honor, this was an attempt to not waste resources and time.
Try not to. I know how frustrating that was for me when we would have extended hearings over long periods of time. And I always seek to have judicial efficiency, right? Because I only have Thursdays to be able to do these hearings unless we want to sit here all day long. Because the rest of our dockets are atrocious. So the rest of the days don't work. And then I can tell you right now, we won't be able to hear this until when I come back, July, August. That's gonna be the next time I can hear it, is August. We're gonna go on recess until 11:20. And then I'll come back and I'll make a decision about what to do for the rest of the year. Okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Order in the court.
Recall in the matter of the People versus Nakia Wallace. This is ticket number Z808261, count one. Interfere with government. Oh, let's read it. Interfere with government employee performing their duty, and count two is loitering. Appearances once again for the record, starting with the city attorney
Good morning, Your Honor. Alyssa Schrader for the People, P80322.
and counsel.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nancy A. Parker for defendant, P number P84325.
Ma'am, can you state your name for the record?
Nakia Wallace.
All right, you all may be seated. Before we took a short break, it was brought to my attention that two of the officers, as per my order, are not present. Understanding is that, because of a prior hearing that we had to discuss the merits of the prosecutorial misconduct that was alleged, counsel did not believe that those officers needed to be a part of it. So it brings me to this question as of today. Do we want to argue the prosecutorial misconduct and then set it for and then I'll give my answer on the date that we're gonna have to do for the officers to come? Or do we want to do everything at the very end and argue both matters at that time? I'll give you both a moment to think about that, because I will give you the opportunity to argue today if you want to, and I'll render a decision before we begin the next hearing next time. Or we can do it all at the very end with the opportunity to then conclude at that point in time. And then I'll render my decision at another date, probably not too far from then though.
My quick thoughts, Your Honor, is we're still in some negotiations. I think it might be prudent to wait and do it on the next hearing date since we're coming back anyway.
Counsel?
No objection, Your Honor. We'll save argument until our next court date.
And then that way, we give you the opportunity and ability to think about everything and exactly how you want to move forward with it. I hate to render a decision without you both being able to make appropriate arguments. And I know for me, at least, I don't know if you need to go back and read the transcript in order to make sure you can give all the thoughts that you need to be able to give at that point in time. And I don't believe in just throwing people under the bus like that without the opportunity to fairly prepare. The next date that we've selected is July 13th. Does that work for both parties?
Yes, Your Honor.
That's right.
Okay. If at some point it does not, check with the officers, please, today, and make sure that they will be able to be present for that hearing in the morning. Once again, I will enable myself, hopefully, to have the docket blocked off like it was today, so that we can get started right away and get this to some type of ending point at some point in time. Madam, yes.
I was going to make one matter for the record. We did discuss at the beginning of this hearing the correction of count two. Sister counsel and I have discussed how to email the court. We're going to send them a copy of the prosecutorial file. That should be enough to correct this issue.
So as long as there's been open communication about the correction of it, my clerk is not going to do anything. She's been ordered to just sit there and they are handling it upstairs. Is that correct?
Correct, ma'am.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that gets handled, as long as you have some discussion about it. At some point in time, if you need to make arguments, just let me know. I'll allow you to make arguments at that point in time. Is there anything else for the record for the city?
No, no.
All right. Madam Defense Counsel?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Madam Court Reporter, if I need to order the transcript for today. If I need to fill out any paperwork, please let the court know, and I will get that over to you so that you can make sure you have what you need. Okay. And then we'll provide copies to both parties as well, so that you'll be able to argue. Are you able to do it before the July 13th date? Is that too close?
No.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure, because some people are backed up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, so I want to make sure, and if not, I will give them adequate amount of time to review your.
Right.
Okay, all right, if there's nothing further, that does adjourn, we're gonna adjourn this matter for the rest of the day. We'll conclude or pick back up on July 13th, okay?
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
you're
you, Your
welcome.
Honor.
You're welcome.
Dismissed.
You are. Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.